I started acting at the age of 24 and now I am 30. So I've been acting roughly about 6 years. It'll technically be 6 years next year in 2021, but it's been roughly 6 years. And I started acting a couple of months after my husband and I got married. And the way we got married actually motivated me in some ways to consider theater. So my husband and I, we actually won an $80,000 wedding from Arena Stage in Washington, D.C. Arena Stage is a regional theater in the District of Columbia, and that's where my husband and I are originally from. So you're probably wondering how I won an $80,000 wedding, right? Well, I don't have time to tell that story in context with all the other stories that I'm going to tell today. So if you'd like to know that story, I encourage you to go ahead and check out my husband and I's podcast called the Happily Huguley podcast. And we have a 3-part series on how we became the Huguleys that goes into detail about how we won that wedding. Anyway, so basically, we won this wedding. We got married on January 2nd, 2015. And on our honeymoon, we had a conversation, my husband and I, we had a conversation with one another about, well, what's next for us? What are we going to do? And we were both very much in a place where we were like happy with one another, happy with the fact that we were able to purchase a home and have our cars and our good jobs and graduate from graduate school and all of those things. But we realized that we weren't truly happy. That's actually the basis of our podcast, spoiler alert. But nonetheless, we were both like, there's something that is missing. We knew we weren't ready for kids, but we knew we wanted to do something else. There was something else that we didn't quite have just yet. We started talking with each other about our careers, and we realized that neither one of us were exactly happy with them. And so I said, you know what? I've never thought about theater. Like something just came to me when it was like, you should think about theater. And it's so funny that I had never really thought about it fully in this way. There were a couple of times in graduate school where I was getting a little bit of an inkling that it might be a good idea for me to pursue theater, but I never followed it or never followed all the way through. I didn't know how to break into getting into theater. And I knew that I wasn't going to be eligible to do like an MFA in theater because I had no theater experience, but I had already been through college, 4 years of college for another major. So I was like, crap, like, how do I get into this? Nonetheless, jumping back to that conversation that I had with my husband, we came back from our honeymoon, and then it was time for us to enter into a season of fasting with the church that we were attending at the time. The name of that church is Judah Simple Amy Zion Church, and every year around Lent, they do a season of consecration. Now, the idea behind consecration is that you separate yourself so that you can get more in tune with God's voice. And so the both of us entered into that season of consecration where we were taking time to pray and to talk to God and spend more time with Him. And that included no social media. I believe we weren't eating meat. We might have been eating fish. No television, no secular radio. Like everything that we did, it was straight up like, if it wasn't for work, it was for, the intent of being more in alignment with God. And so during that time, that was when the thought came to me, why have you not done theater? Or think about theater. I don't remember how the thought came to me exactly, but I remember it like it was yesterday because I was at home, I was laying across the bed, and I was, typing on my computer, and I typed in theater in Washington, D.C. Now, I'm originally from Washington, D.C., and that's where I was living at the time, and so I Googled theater in D.C., and the D.C. Black Theater Festival comes up. Now, when I see the DC Black Theater Festival come up, I look at the dates to see when the auditions were going to be happening, and the auditions were scheduled to happen that very weekend. It was a Thursday when I saw it, and that very weekend there were going to be auditions. Now, I did not have any prior theater experience, so I literally was like, yo, how am I going to go to this audition with a resume and headshot when I don't have either? So I actually, for my headshot, brought one of my graduation pictures. How embarrassing. I'll put it on the screen just so that you guys can see. It's been a journey. And yes, I did have braces at the time. So I brought that as my headshot. And for the resume, what I developed on my resume were productions that I've been in throughout the course of my adult years. And so when I was in college, even though I didn't do theater, I was the director of these multidisciplinary productions that I brought all of these different ministries together on campus. It was called the Night of Worship and Witness. And so what we would do is have like the gospel choir and the dance ministry and the Black Student Union and all these other groups. We would all come together to create this Night of Worship and Witness. And so I put that on my resume. I've been doing liturgical dance since I was about 6 6 years old, and so I've danced all over, you know, the East Coast, and so I put that on my resume as well as some of the places and churches that I've danced at, and that was pretty much it. I had no other like stage experience. I had some public speaking experience, but other than that, your sis didn't have anything else, and so I put that on a resume. I listed some special skills, and then your girl went on ahead and kept it moving. So I brought that with me to the audition. For this specific audition, you had to bring 20 copies of your headshot and resume. So I went and I got 20 copies made, and I brought them into the audition room. And when I auditioned, I was extremely nervous because I didn't know what to expect. I came into the room and I did a monologue that I had found online, and that monologue was called I Ate the Divorce Papers. And so I did my monologue, and then at the end of that, the person that was running the audition asked me, "Hey, can you sing?" And I said, "Yeah." And she's like, "Well, let's hear it." And I'm like, wow, why did I say that? I have nothing prepared. Like, I did feel like at that moment I could carry a tune, but I was not prepared to sing anything in that moment. So I sang the first thing that came to my mind. It was a hymn. It was "Were You There When They Crucified My Lord?" I don't know why my mind went to that song first. I guess it was because we were in Lent in that season of consecration, but I sang that. And so they told me, "Good job." I left out of the room, and once you left out of the room, they basically had directors who were interested in you come approach you and have conversations, and that didn't necessarily mean that you were going to get a role, but it was a high likelihood if someone spoke with you that you might get an email from them later. So later, a few days later, I was contacted by a few different directors, but there was one director who cast me as the lead in her stage play called Battle of Wills, Cheryl Jackson. I still talk to Cheryl to this day, and I'm so grateful that she gave me my first opportunity to be on stage. That was a really cool play that we did. We actually did it at Gallaudet University. I can't think of the name of the theater right off the top of my head, so I'll have to put it in the description or like on the screen or something like that. But that's where we did her play, and it was a really cool experience. It was that experience that told me, like, girl, you have to be able to do theater. Like, you have to be able to do more of this because this is what you're supposed to be doing. At the time, I was working for the U.S. Department of State in the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs as a program coordinator, and I had basically, I guess the year before, so when I was 23, the job that I had as an internship turned into a full-time job. So I had a full-time position, benefits, salary, all the things. It was a really, good job to have at such a young age. And so it enabled me to be able to do a lot of the things that I wanted to do at that time. And so when I came to this kind of crossroads, I'm like, okay, well, how am I going to balance work and still do theater? I just made sure that the opportunities that I wanted to do would rehearse in the evening, and then anything that I needed to audition for, during work hours, I would make sure that I had enough leave so that I could take off and go and audition. But anyway, back to the timeline. So after I did Battle of Wills, it was a really amazing experience. And I'm like, okay, how do I keep booking jobs? I was just like, how do I keep doing this? How do I keep this train going? And so I actually couldn't find anything for a while. I didn't know how to tap into the DC theater scene. And with someone who had no training, it is really hard to tap into a scene like the DC theater scene without training. Not impossible, but it is a little bit difficult. And so I went for months without booking anything. And so I found out about a couple of resources, and those resources helped me to apply for some voiceover and commercial roles. And I ended up booking a couple of commercial roles and voiceover roles. My first commercial ended up happening January 2016. I actually had to shoot this on my husband's birthday, and it was for DoubleTree by Hilton. It was a really cool commercial. I got to eat DoubleTree cookies all day. That probably sounds like a dream, but it's actually not, because eating that many cookies, even though they are delicious, I must say, it's a lot. They actually had to have, I think they call it a dump bucket, where we would chew the cookies and then just dump it into the pail because it just gets to be so much after that. So yeah, January 2016, I ended up booking that commercial. And I guess I went a little bit out of order, because before I booked the DoubleTree commercial, I ended up doing my own show. When I couldn't find opportunities to audition, I said, you know what? I'm just going to make my own show. And I'm going to basically have this recital where I will sell tickets and invite people to come see me perform. Now, you guys, I had no training. I hope to goodness you can't find any videos of this anymore. I definitely had videos out online, and I hope they are gone. I did my own show. It was called A Legacy for Our Daughters. And the show was basically I called it an artist release showcase, something dramatic like that. And the showcase basically was a compilation of monologues and short films that I had created. Now the short films were my original ideas, but the monologues were very well-known monologues from various women in history. And so I brought that all together to call it A Legacy for Our Daughters. And it was in honor of my great Aunt Beulah that had passed away in 2014. And the way the dates worked out, I was able to do the showcase on her birthday, like on October 18th, 2015. So it worked out and it ended up being really cool. So 2016, like I told you guys already, I did the DoubleTree by Hilton commercial. And then by then I was just trying to figure out ways that I could really, get specific on where I was trying to go in this whole acting journey, if you will. And so I discovered an acting studio that was called Mark McKinnon Acting Studio, and I started going there for group classes. And then I also worked with Mark a couple of times individually. And as I was going through that part of my journey, I realized, I really want to do theater. Film and TV acting is great, and I learned so much while I was there, but I was like, you know what, I really want to do theater. That's the thing that's drawing me at the moment, and so I want to follow that. And so I ended up watching, as corny as it sounds, I started watching Glee on Netflix, you guys. I had never seen it before. I actually think about it now. My friend Sylvia, who went to college with me, she was like, hey, you should watch Glee. And I remember her having a conversation with me about this, but I never followed through in catching up with the series. I so wish I had, because I probably would have started theater a lot sooner than I did. Nonetheless, I started watching Glee in 2016, and I watched all 6 or 7 seasons, however many there are. And I remember in season 6 or 7 that Rachel Berry went to a conservatory called NYADA in New York. And I'm like, well, NYADA has to be based off of something, or it has to be real, one of the two. And so I end up Googling NYADA, and a school called the American Musical and Dramatic Academy comes up in my search. And I'm like, oh, well, what is the American Musical and Dramatic Academy? I should go there. I should study there. And I should, go to New York. Now, at the time, that sounds such a simple thought, but at the time, I really didn't think I was going to be able to do that. In my mind, because I had a house in Maryland, I was like, well, I can't leave my house. What will my husband do for work? How are we going to make this transition from moving from, Maryland to New York? I have a full-time job. Will I have a full-time job in New York? I didn't know all of those details. So this was really some leap of faith type stuff. So I end up seeing that AMDA is having auditions that same weekend. I'm like, why does this happen to me? I already told you guys early in this story about how, when I was auditioning for the DC Black Theater Festival, I saw it on a Thursday. There was auditions that weekend. Well, no different for AMDA. I saw it on a Thursday. The auditions were that Sunday. So in the span of that 3 to 4 days that I had, I end up calling my friend Zuri, and Zuri actually had gone to AMDA. And so I call her up. We went to high school together, and I say, hey, Zuri, AMDA's having auditions this weekend. I don't feel like I'm really prepared. Maybe I should just wait for the next round, but I'm really thinking this is something that I should consider and I should do because I want to do musical theater. I really feel drawn to the stage, and this is what I want to do. And so she listens to me talk about all the reasons why I really shouldn't go and why I'm not ready in the moment. And by the time she listens to me, she's like, yeah, Kaisha, God is telling me that you should just go. And I was like, girl, why is God telling you that? Why should I go right now? I'm not ready. And she's like, no, just go to the audition. And so I work over those next 3 to 4 days trying to prepare audition material. So I was able to do a monologue and a song. And so I used a monologue from a play I had been in prior to my AMDA audition. And then I also used a song called Part of Your World, which was a song that I had worked on in a musical theater class I had taken at Studio Theater. So I realized that I've jumped the story a bit again, so I have to go back a little bit. So before I actually auditioned for AMDA, I took a musical theater class at Studio Theater. It was a 4 or 5 week class, and it was just kind of a very ground level foundational intro to musical theater. I felt like it gave me a good idea of what to expect in a musical theater class, or what to do when you're in a class like that. So that was great. It kind of prepared me for AMDA so that wasn't the first time that I was singing in front of other students. So I was glad to have that under my belt so that I wasn't completely just a nervous wreck on my first day at AMDA. But yeah, I took that class. I also ended up doing some other stage plays. So after Battle of Wills, I did my show, A Legacy for Our Daughters. I did the commercial, DoubleTree by Hilton. And then after that, I did Voices, which was a stage play that I really, really enjoyed doing. It was so fun. It was in a black box theater in DC, the Mead Theater Lab. Really cool show, great cast. I had a lot of fun doing that show. I did a musical, which was a part of the DC Fringe Festival, and that musical was called How to Be the Perfect Wing Woman. After that, I ended up doing a play called Beneath the Surface, and that was really cool. It was at Woodstream Church. And at the time, that was probably one of the largest audiences that I had performed for. And that I was the lead of that play. And it was really, it was a good experience. I felt so good being on stage. And it was just like, yo, like, and I will never forget that audition. I'm going to try to put a clip if I have the footage still. But after that audition, I felt so good. I felt so good. I came into the audition so confident. I was like, oh, I nailed it. I have never felt that confident. And I just knew somehow that I booked it. And so, cool story, when I booked Beneath the Surface, basically what ends up happening is, you know, the director comes to see me and How to Be the Perfect Wing Woman, and she tells me that night that I actually booked Beneath the Surface. It was so freaking cool, you guys, so freaking cool. So I ended up doing that show. And then after that, I end up getting a chance to perform at the Lincoln Theater, DC's historic Lincoln Theater, and that was so cool, doing Women of Plums. Women of Plums was a collection of poetry by DC poet laureate Dolores Kendrick, Dolores Kendrick. She has passed now, but we were able to perform her works, and she was actually able to be there and see it, so that was really, really cool. And so basically the AMDA auditions came after all of this. So I had that much of a resume that transpired. Also, there were a couple of voiceover roles in there that I didn't mention, but let's jump into the AMDA stuff, shall we? So I auditioned for AMDA. I do a monologue from Voices that I just told you about, and then I sing Part of Your World, because that was a song that I worked on in the studio theater class in DC. When I come into the audition, you guys, my accompanist is literally the accompanist that was my accompanist for the studio theater musical theater class. Had already actually had the opportunity to sing with him and sing this very song that I sang in that class in my AMDA audition. So that worked out really, really nicely for me. It made me feel a little bit more calm. So I went into the audition. We had an opportunity to sing it once through. And then, you know, when it was time for us to come back, they lined us up. Audition, did the thing, felt decent about it, but wasn't sure if I was going to get in because I wasn't sure if I had what it took to make it in New York. I was not sure. So I just didn't know what to do. I was like a nervous wreck. So after, you know, auditioning, I had to wait several weeks, and I was still, of course, looking for work in the DC area. But a few weeks later, I found out that I was accepted into the musical theater conservatory program at AMDA, and that I could start in the fall of 2017. So my husband and I, we started to make plans. We started to save money, and we started to think about, okay, we're going to rent our house. Like, what are we going to do? And figure out all the things. He started applying for jobs, and we were going to be making this move to New York. I speak to my admissions counselor on one of my trips to New York to see the school, and she's like, you know what, Kaisha, you really should start in the summer if you can, because if you start in the summer, there are going to be more students that are your age. I was coming into AMDA at the age of 26, and so she was encouraging me to start in the summer so that I would have more of my cohort would be around my age, because a lot of students that attend AMDA are, you know, 17, 18, you know, just getting out of high school. She was like, come during the summer, there are more students that'll be your age. So I said, you know what, that's a good point, maybe I should. And so hubby and I talked about it, and we started making plans to try to make a move happen even sooner so that we could get to New York in July or June of 2017. So what ends up happening, you guys, we move, and hubby has a job. And I get here about 2 weeks before, you know, his scheduled move is supposed to happen. And when the job that he got comes back with the salary, we realized, we are not going to be able to make that work, because I quit my job and I wasn't going to be working while I was at AMDA due to the schedule and the course load and everything. The decision between the two of us was that he was going to support me while I was in school so that I can focus fully on diving into musical theater, and he would be the one that would be financially supporting the two of us. But when his job came back and said that the salary was going to be much lower than anticipated, we knew he was going to need to find another job, and him finding another job was not easy. We actually ended up doing over 2.5 years of long distance marriage because it took him a while to find a job. And so oh, you guys, that time was so hard. I was literally in the city by myself, and it was a really stressful, chaotic, crazy time. Also filled with some joy. It wasn't all bad, but it was really, really hard. Being in a place like New York by yourself, it was very unnerving at first. I was afraid a lot, actually. It took me a while to get used to the city. Being a city girl from DC, it's very different than being a city girl from New York. This city has a way of punching you in the face. That's just the best way to put it. It really does. But also it'll hug you sometimes at the same time. Makes no sense, but whatever. So did the AMDA thing, right? And, I graduate from AMDA September of 2018, which I was really, really excited to complete my training. After AMDA, I started auditioning for about 8 months. And it took me 8 months, you guys, to actually book a role. I went out probably on over 100 auditions in those 8 months. I mean, I was literally pounding the pavement. I was getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and going down to Pearl Studios, Ripley Greer, Actors Equity Association. I was putting my name on those unofficial lists, and I was like, okay, I need to get in this audition. I was showing up. I was networking. I was literally taking classes and doing all the things, but the roles were not coming, and I was starting to get discouraged. I was like, okay, I literally gave up my whole life in DC for this, and why am I not booking? I started to get extremely discouraged. So pretty much right after I graduated from school, I was able to do 2 cabarets, and both of those cabarets were at the West End Lounge. And then I was also able to do a play called 12 Angry Women at the Sonnet Theater. None of those opportunities were paid. So although they were professional opportunities to actually, perform in New York, they weren't paid. So I was trying to get paid opportunities because I ultimately want to be paid to do this craft, right? So after those opportunities, I basically, like I said, I auditioned a long time. And so I was getting really discouraged, and I was starting to get very, very frustrated because I wasn't making any money. I still didn't get a job because my hope was to get a performer job. So after I graduated, one of the things I started doing was pitching some workshops to AMDA to teach students. I was like, hey, I have some ideas of things that I think would be really helpful for students to know about the business, and I'd love to teach some workshops on it. And so I started developing these workshops, and so I was making some money from those, but I was only doing those once every other week or once a month, and so that wasn't enough to sustain me, and I was getting frustrated because I wasn't booking anything. So it was a really challenging time. But I decided to change my mindset, and it took a while for me to get here. Like I said, it took some months, but I said, you know what? If no one is going to book me, I'm going to book myself. And that is essentially how I started my podcast. I decided to book myself in 8 episodes of A Kaisha Story. That's the name of my podcast. And so that is what motivated me to ultimately keep going, because I'm like, well, look, I might not always book, but just like it happened in DC where I didn't find any work and I created my own show, I'm the kind of person that can create my own work. And so I booked myself for that podcast, and it gave me something to focus on creatively. And that, I think, ultimately freed me up to not be so desperate for an opportunity that I end up auditioning for and booking my off-Broadway debut, Revelation the Musical. So I found out that I booked Revelation in February of 2019, and I ended up making my off-Broadway debut in May of 2019. It was really, really incredible. The show ran for about a month. We had 4 weekends. It was so awesome. I had 60 family and friends come up from various places to see the show and support me. It was really, really cool. After Revelation, I think this happens after every show. I'm always like, oh my gosh, am I going to book again? Every actor probably knows this feeling, will I ever work again? Has this all been a fluke? Is this for me? Will I work? You just have all of those thoughts, right? And so I kind of got back into that mode a little bit, and I said, you know what? Let me just start getting my podcast together. But before that actually happened, I ended up booking the full Monty at the Argyle Theater, and that show was so fun, you guys. It's a comedy, so it literally was so fun to work on. That probably is one of my favorite shows that I've ever done, and that theater was a real pleasure to work at, and so it was really cool to do the full Monty. So I do that, and then after the full Monty, I immediately go into Miracle on 34th Street at the same theater. There was literally a 4-day gap between the full Monty and Miracle on 34th Street. I was working on a Christmas show at the end of October, so it kind of felt really weird because it's Halloween, but we're singing Christmas songs. And so that was really cool. And that took me through the end of 2019. My last time performing live was December 29th, 2019. So that was like, I cherish that moment so much more now, given that we are in COVID and this whole pandemic and everything, and theater right now live is not really an option. Like, I think about that last show often because I'm like, man, you just, I'm so much more grateful. So much more grateful. So anyway, I start 2020 and I'm like ready to hit the ground running. I take a 2-week trip to Italy with my husband. And when we get back, I'm like, yo, I'm hitting the ground running. I'm about to book everything possible. Like, I'm literally so determined. So I end up booking a show in South Carolina to do Kinky Boots at Art Center of Coastal Carolina. And then I also book a concert at 54 Below to sing Once on This Island as Mama Yurley. So I'm so excited to do both of those things. And I'm like going to rehearsals for the concert, and I'm also directing the Black History Celebration program at AMDA. I'm like juggling all the things, and then COVID happens. And it's like, what in the world is happening? Like, my career is going so well. Like, are you joking? And from the Kinky Boots show, I was going to actually earn points towards being in the union, being in Actors Equity. So I was like, what the heck? I was literally so blown. And so I am keeping my fingers and my toes crossed that Kinky Boots will still happen in 2021. It's been postponed. Not allowed to share the dates yet, but hopefully, you guys, it happens. Nonetheless, you know, I am hoping that I can work next year on stage and that I can do so safely, you know what I mean? So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now. During the pandemic, I have a quick update. I was actually able to get an agent while I was in the pandemic. I must be really talking because my camera just completely ran out of memory. So I hope I'm starting in a similar place to where I left off. Lord have mercy. Anyway, so I got an agent and I was able to do so in the pandemic, which was like a really big goal that I had been trying to accomplish even during that time where I was performing and auditioning and everything. And so that was a really cool accomplishment. I am currently signed to Hudson Artists Agency, and with this opportunity coming into my life, I feel like it was really the time that it was supposed to come. I've been able to work on some things and to submit some self-tapes for various opportunities that I wouldn't have been able to get on my own. So that is one of the benefits in having representation. Your agent should be able to find things for you that you can't find for yourself, or get you into rooms where you're not able to get into yourself. And so I've been really fortunate to have opportunities in that way. And so I'm excited and I can't wait to continue to work with, you know, my agent and everything. So it's been really, really cool. Whew, that was a long story. That was a long story, okay? And the journey continues. You know, I'm looking forward to 2021. I don't know all of what it's going to hold. However, I do hope that it holds, you know, just a lot more opportunities for me to continue to delve into this arts and entertainment industry, into this theater industry. I just want to keep doing this. You know what I mean? I'm not going to make this video any longer than it already is because we are probably finished our tea. We are finished our snack. And so Kaisha needs to finish this video. I just want to thank you so much for tuning in. And if you have any questions, I strongly encourage you to drop them down in the comment section below so that we can chit and chat and all the things. If you don't follow me on Instagram, like, why? So go on over to Instagram and follow me at Kaisha Creates, and make sure you follow me on TikTok as well if you don't already. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. And of course, if you have not subscribed, hit that red button. Turn on notifications so that you know when your girl uploads another video. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll catch you on the next one. Bye.